Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of Arkansas Alive. If you've been with us all week, you know I've been teaching on rightly dividing the word of truth. And I trust that these teachings have enlightened you and revealed truth to you. They will be a major point in a life change. So stay tuned. We're going to continue as Arkansas Alive starts right now. You know, I told you yesterday that I would maybe start in Daniel, the three Hebrew children, or I may go over to Psalm where it talks about a time to die. Ecclesiastes where it talks about a time to die. I may be able to do both of those. So go with me to Daniel chapter 3. This is I think it's humorous, kind of comical the way some people teach it. But again, we're here to rightly divide the word of truth. Not rightly divide truth and error, because that's easy. Rightly dividing the word of truth. And that's what Paul told Timothy, his spiritual son, when he said, Timothy, study to show yourself approved unto God, rightly dividing the word of truth, that you won't be ashamed. When I heard that word study, I always think about my dad told me when I was in high school. He told me, he said, actually it started before I went into high school. I think it was probably junior high. Anyway, he was trying to establish a study habit pattern for me. And he was helping me, which he should have done, and he did. But he said, I'll let you choose when you're going to study. Notice, it's not if you're going to study, it's when you're going to study. He said, you can either study when you first come home from school, or you can go out and play and burn off all the excess energy, as a lot of kids do. And then you come in, you eat supper, and you can study after supper. You can either study when you come home from school until we eat, or you can wait till after we eat and you can study then. He said, so it's not a matter of whether you're going to study or not. It's just a matter of when, and I'll let you choose the when. Now keep in mind, there were no distractions for us studying in those days. We didn't have television. We didn't have internet. We didn't have computers. We didn't have social platforms. They had none of those things. So about all we had to distract us was if we wanted to go outside and play football, or if we wanted to go out and do some other sport or play with our friends. So it wasn't a matter of if I was going to study, it was a matter of when I was going to study. And he let me choose, which was wise on his part. And he told me, he said, son, if you don't develop good study habits now, when you get to college, and my dad was a man of faith, he said, when you get to college, he said, there's not going to be anybody to see that you study, which he meant, I'm not going to be there. You're going to be on your own. You're going to be grown. You'll have to make your own decisions. And there's nobody there that's going to see to it that you study. You have to make that decision, and you have to develop good study habits. And I found that to be true. Man, I got to college. The professors didn't care whether you came to class or not. You could sleep all day if you want to. You didn't even have to go to class. You didn't have to study. But you did have to take the test, and you did have to face the music when you came home. If your parents were paying for your education, they won't know why you didn't make better grades. So Paul told Timothy, study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And that's what we're doing here this week. Now listen to this. This is Daniel chapter 3. I guess we could start reading at verse 13. Daniel chapter 3, verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, his rage and his fury commanded, bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the three Hebrew children. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do you not serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I've set up? Now if you be ready at that time, when you hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, the dulcimer, those were musical instruments, and all kinds of music. If you fall down and worship the image which I have made, it will be well with you. But if you worship not, you will be cast the same hour into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that will deliver you out of my hands? So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer you in this matter. In other words, we don't even need to pray about this. We don't need to meet together about this. We already know. We have this in our hearts. If it be so, and now let's read this the way that it has been read religiously. O king, we're not careful to answer you about this. If it be so, if you throw us in the fiery furnace, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fire furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. Now, did you get that? Did you get the narrative, the story right? Did you rightly divide what was said? If you cast us into the fiery furnace, our God, whom we serve, will deliver us out of your hand. Now, here's the way we've read it traditionally. But if he doesn't, but if not, if he doesn't deliver us, be it known unto you, O king, that we will not serve your gods nor worship the golden image which you've set up. Now, here's where the humor comes in. Of course you won't worship the gods that Nebuchadnezzar has built. Because if your God doesn't deliver you, you'll be a crispy critter. You'll be dead. You'll be burned up. So that doesn't even make sense, does it? No. And that's not rightly dividing the word of truth. Listen to the correct reading of it. If you throw us into the fiery furnace, if it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if you don't throw us into the fiery furnace, now that's rightly dividing the word of truth. If you don't throw us into the fire furnace, be it known unto you, we will still not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image which you've set up. Now, why is it important? Why is that important? Why is it important to rightly divide that word of truth? Well, in the first place, if the way you've been reading it traditionally and denominationally and religiously, it doesn't make sense. If our God doesn't deliver us, we still won't serve. Well, of course you won't. You'll be dead. So that doesn't work. That doesn't equate. That doesn't make sense. But it does make sense when you say, if you throw us into the furnace, our God will deliver us. But if you don't throw us into the furnace, we're still not going to worship your God. Now, why is this important? And why does it work for you to interpret it correctly, to rightly divide the word of truth? I've heard it said, and you may have heard it said too. Again, if you don't rightly divide it, you come up with the wrong doctrine. And if you have the wrong doctrine, you have the wrong belief. If you read it traditionally, if you throw us in the fiery furnace, our God will deliver us. But if he doesn't deliver us, then what? Well, right there, you've made a contention out of God's justification, God's willingness, God's authority, God's power, if He doesn't deliver us. And what people do is they take that and they insert that every time their prayers are not answered. If they don't get a prayer answered, they use this scripture to prove that God doesn't always answer prayer. If you throw us in the fire, if you throw us into the fiery furnace, our God will deliver you. But if He doesn't, and right there, you've made an indictment against God that you can't always depend on Him to deliver you out of any situation. So, that's another reason to rightly divide the word of truth. Because if you accept the improper dividing of it, then you've got a question in your mind for the rest of your life that you never know what God's going to do. And you don't know whether He'll deliver you or not. So make the correction and restate, reread, rightly divide this word of truth. Now, some people have these problems. Let's go over to Psalm 90. Psalm 90. And let's look at the scriptures that tell us in Psalm 90, it says in verse 12, "Teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom." To rightly divide this verse is simply saying that God is telling you to number your days so that you may apply your hearts to wisdom. In other words, make every day count. Make every day count. Apply the wisdom of God that's in your heart to every one of your days. Teach us to take this seriously and number our days that we may apply your wisdom. Make full account of our days, what we did with our time, how we did it. If we were serving you, number our days. Teach us to number our days so that we may apply your wisdom. He didn't say your days were numbered. We're rightly dividing the word of truth. But a lot of people think that. They think their days are numbered. Well, when your number comes up, you're gone. No, there is no number. There's no expiration date stamped on the bottom of your foot. There's no number that's going to come up that's going to determine when you die. He's not saying that your days are numbered. He's telling you to teach us to number our days so we can apply your wisdom to these days. Now, this will help us. Go over to Psalm 91 and go down to verse 16. Psalm 91:16. "With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation." The marginal reference says, length of days. With long life, with length of days, will I satisfy him, talking about his child, you. With long life will I satisfy you and show you my salvation. It's God's good pleasure to show you His goodness and His salvation. So with length of days, with long life, will He satisfy you and show you His salvation. Rightly divide the word of truth, and it'll prolong your life. All right, let's go over to Genesis chapter 6. And there was a time, I think it's kind of died down now, but there was a time where this was a contention. It was disagreements. People didn't know what to think about it. Some people jumped on the bandwagon and some people didn't. Genesis chapter 6, and let's look at I guess we could start with verse 1. Genesis 6, chapter 1. And we'll skip down and eventually read verses 5 and 6. But Genesis chapter 6, verse 1. It came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives which they chose. Now, let's go down to verse 5. God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That's the condition that was in the earth. If you ever gone to Lexington, Kentucky, and gone through the ark, Noah's ark, they built an exact duplication of what was in the scriptures. It's an exact replica. All the dimensions are there. And you can go through it, and you can see Noah's ark the way it was in Noah's day. And they have videos that they've made to show you what was going on outside the ark, on the earth, all of the idolatry, the degradation, the filth, the crime, man's heart. It says here that every imagination of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. That's what was going on the earth. It was pathetic. It grieved God in his heart that he had made man. Now, go back up to verse 3. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for he is also flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. Now, some have deduced out of that your lifespan is 120 years. The Bible does not teach that. That's not rightly dividing the word of truth. And as a matter of fact, if he was actually saying that you could live 120 years, at the time this was written, Noah was already 500 years old. So it didn't refer to Noah. And every commentary that I have ever studied always said the same thing, that God was not talking about Noah's lifespan or the lifespan of man. He was talking about the condition of man, the ugliness, the fear, the degradation, the wickedness. And he was saying, I'm not always going to strive with man in the condition that he is in. I'm going to give him 120 years to get his act together. Basically, is what he is saying. I'll give man 120 years to get his act together, to repent of all these things. But of course, man didn't, and God flooded the earth, and only Noah and his household were saved. If you don't rightly divide the word of truth, you paint yourself in a corner, and you get yourself all situated in the wrong way. If you will rightly divide the word of truth, you will have sound doctrine, and you will be able to stand on that sound doctrine and believe God in that sound doctrine. Let's go over to Ecclesiastes, and let's look at chapter 3. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And let's look at verse 2. Well, we can go ahead and read verse 1. Ecclesiastes 3, 1. To everything there's a season and a time, to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. Okay, there's a time to be born, there's a time to die, because to everything there's a season and a time, and to every purpose there's a purpose under the heaven. Now, many times we don't rightly divide the word of truth, and we think, and we hear people teach, that there's an appointed time to die. Well, let's clear that up. Let's rightly divide the word and see. Let's go over to Hebrews chapter 9. I hope I haven't written this down wrong. If I have, I'll just have to quote it to you. Hebrews 9. Yeah, here it is. I wrote it down right. Hebrews 9:27. And as it is appointed unto man once to die, but after this the judgment. Okay. In Hebrews 9:27, it says that it's appointed unto man once to die, and then the judgment. In Ecclesiastes, it said there's a time to die. But there's nowhere in the Scriptures that tell us we have an appointed time to die. Don't get those two mixed up. It's appointed unto man once to die. Why? Because God told Adam and Eve in the garden, they said, the day that you eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. Now the word die there is plural, meaning two deaths, meaning one has to do with spiritual death, the other one has to do with physical death. Spiritual death is not the cessation of existence. Spiritual death is separation from God. Because God created you a spirit. He created you in His own image and likeness so He could fellowship with you, so He could talk to you. Adam walked with God in the cool of the day. God created you a spirit being so He could fellowship with you, communicate with you. Spiritual death puts an end to that fellowship because spiritual death separates you from God and you can no longer fellowship with Him. Well, that's what happened to Adam and Eve after they sinned. They no longer had any fellowship with God. That's why God, you read further on down in Genesis, God came looking for Adam and said, Adam, where are you? It wasn't that God was no longer omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. It wasn't that God didn't know where He was. Adam answered him and said, we were afraid. And God would say, afraid of what? Afraid of whom? Oh, well, it was because we were naked. And God said, who told you you were naked? And I studied that out years ago, rightly dividing the word of truth. The word naked there does not mean, as we think, it doesn't refer to nudity. It meant that he was unclothed. Adam was clothed with the glory of God. But when he sinned against God, he lost his covering. He lost his clothes. His cloth, his covering was the glory of God. So when he sinned and he was hiding, it wasn't because he was nude, because he was nude before. But now he knew that he had lost his covering from God, and he was hiding. Why? Because spiritual death means they were separated. The second meaning of that word die in Genesis was that there would be physical death. The physical body, the physical man would die. And that happened 930 years later. Adam didn't die for 930 years, but he was separated from God the moment he sinned. I was reading and studying the other day about Jewish funerals and prepared for burial. And I had thought about this and heard about it, but I wanted to make sure. So I looked it up. And if you're Orthodox, religious Jew, you will subscribe to this burial procedure. Jews, now I don't know what the law is in the state of Arkansas, but in Jewish law, Jewish tradition, when you die, you should be buried within 24 hours. And they don't embalm the body, take the blood out and put chemicals in there. And they don't put them in a casket or a steel vault or any of the things that we do today, because they purposely want the body to decay, to dematerialize, to return to dust. They say today, the proper way, the Jewish funeral, if you're Orthodox, you're a true religious Jew, when you die, within 24 hours, they wash the body. Now, I haven't checked it out with funeral homes. I probably should one day. They wash the body like they did Jesus, and they wrap the body, usually in a prayer shawl. If the religious Jew has a prayer shawl that they wear, they take that prayer shawl and they wrap the body after the body's been washed and wrapped in the prayer shawl, and they place the body either in the ground, no coffin, or they place it in a wooden box, a wooden coffin. Billy Graham was buried in a pine coffin. They prefer a wood or pine box or coffin for the sole purpose of the decay to take place as soon as possible, to take the body back to the dust of the earth. And they say even to make sure that it decay process takes place, if they need to, they'll drill a hole in the bottom of that coffin so that the decaying process will take place faster. So they understand that man's a spirit being, not just a body. We have a body, but when the body dies, the body decays, it goes back to the earth, back to the dust. But there is no appointed time for that to happen. There's a time to die, but there's not an appointed time. You can live as long as you're satisfied. That is rightly dividing the word of truth. Thanks for joining me for these special programs. Remember, Jesus is Lord of Arkansas, and wherever in the world you're watching, too.
Send your questions, comments, and testimonies to Happy Caldwell at Post Office Box 26207, Little Rock, Arkansas 72221, or email happycaldwell@vtntv.com. Remember to follow VTN on Facebook at VTN Your Arkansas Christian Connection, and follow Happy Caldwell on X at Happy_Caldwell. VTN is on Roku. Search VTN in the channel store and add us to your lineup. Today's episode is available to watch on demand at VTNTV.com and click Watch. You can also watch VTN via live stream at VTNTV.com.